Good morning, and we are rolling, like definitely rolling. Thank you for joining me again this morning. Welcome back to Justification, and we are on a roll. I mean, the things that we are covering, everything that we have been articulating, what we have been putting into piece by piece, the portrait of what we've been building upon, the foundation of what the Bible's philosophy is, how the Bible defines its terms: sanctification, salvation, redemption, deliverance, justification. We have been rolling. And it is the morning, so maybe I'm not all there. Hopefully you're all there. Hopefully you can get me there. The more I can think about you being there with me will get me there. So thank you for joining me this morning. Blessings to you. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your support. Thank you for reaching out to me and letting me know what is working, what isn't. Thank you. And I guess that actually moves us into where I'd like us to pick up where we last left off, which is the idea of those bones. Or last meeting together, you referenced in the book of Kings, Elisha, how his bones, when touched, revived a dead individual back to life. And so connecting that, we want to begin there. We want to, the essence of our time together, I want it to be on that reviving, on those bones, on that dead individual raising back to life. Because we too, we're not supposed to look at that and think literal. Fine to think about it however we will, but when it comes to edification, when it comes to how we are to react and to respond to what we hear in the Bible, it needs to be leveled, it needs to be balanced, it needs to be simple. And in a real sense, it needs to hit home. And it's not going to hit home enough the more that we continue to view these stories as the tales that they are, and to observe them as for whatever wonder we believe that they're dawning on whatever perception we have of God. This needs to be real. This needs to be brought home. What we have is a prophet of the living God that had died. Another individual had died. They threw that dead individual on the bones of the dead prophet, and this individual came back to life from touching those bones when once dead. This is in the Bible not simply for it to just be there, but for our time now. There are bones of a specific prophet of the living God that when touched, our deadness is to regenerate into a liveliness. Our deadness is to pass away, and new life, new breath, newness of spirit, as Paul would say in the book of Romans chapter 7, is to enter back into us. These bones, in today's sense, are not literal bones. They're no literal bones of the living God's chief apostle to plop onto. The bones, if we're going to think about it, these bones of Elijah, the man's gone. The man is gone. All that is left are bones. These bones represent a witness to what was of the man. These bones represent a witness of what was concerning that man. And so when we get to the living God's chief apostle, we too have bones that we are to rely on. And these bones are not literal. The man is gone. But what remains, we are to fall on, and not we again. We, not physical. We as in our devotional conversation. We as in the body of our faith. The body of our faith is to fall on the bones of this individual. And falling on the bones of this individual, we are to revive. So the story back then is actually illustrating how we today are to live, because this story is supposed to be relevant now. Really does nothing if we just keep it in the context that it's in the book of Kings. We have to translate it into meaning something now for us that is real, and the Bible does that. And the Bible does that. And so remember, in our last meeting, we reviewed this. And the meetings prior, and even the last meeting, we went to the book of John. John chapter 8:52. And if we didn't, blessing. Let us do this now. John chapter 8:52. John 8:52. John chapter 8, verse 52. Reads, this portion, this important portion is all that we will need. John 8 and verse 52, if a man keep my saying, he shall never taste death. Now this connotes, or is a connotation to what that in the book of Kings that we went through last time, and now again the bones of Elijah, this is pointing towards that. This saying, the saying of this man, the saying of this man, if it prevents death, if the bones of Elijah prevented death, the saying of this man is or are those bones for us. Whosoever would keep this individual's saying will never taste death. This individual fell on the bones of Elisha, and though dead, though he tasted it, he didn't really taste it, digest it. He revived. The bones of this man are a saying. If anybody would keep my saying, if a man would keep my saying, if you would keep my saying, you will never taste death. The saying of this individual are the bones that the body of our faith needs to fall onto. We need to cast the body of our faith. We need to cast what we think we know onto these bones. We need to cast our body of faith, our devotional conversation, our confidence in what we have in the Bible. We need to throw that on the bones, or we need to throw that on the saying of this one individual. And that's important. It's important because it moves us to question, well, what is this man saying? What exactly did he teach in order to not cause death, in order to not taste death? Because as far as we know, we've been trained to think so long as we take in the body, we won't see death. But the Bible's giving us something different, and not even really the Bible. If we're going to take the Bible as being legitimate, the man himself is giving us something different. The man himself is letting us know that not really my physical body should you rely on. It is my saying that you should know and rely on. Because if you know my saying, and if you keep my saying, you will never taste death. And keep in mind, everything here is in the context of what we have been reviewing. That death is in the context of what we've been reviewing. Everything here is in the context of what we've been reviewing. So what is this man's saying? Looking at Galatians, because this saying prevents death. We went through this verse last time. Galatians 3 and verse 13. Galatians 3 and verse 13. Galatians 3 and verse 13 says, Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us, for it is written, cursed is everyone that hangs on a tree. A major part to this individual's saying is what this individual redeems from. And not necessarily this individual, everything. When you go back and you really take in his preaching, you see that he never put anything on himself. John chapter 7, my doctrine. Everything was my doctrine, everything was my saying, everything was my Father hath given me a commandment, what I should say and what I should speak. This is what this man pointed to as for redeeming. Now, this individual hath redeemed us from the curse of the law. Now, the law is also, quote unquote, the law, the philosophy of the religious law, is the definition of sin and is the definition of death. 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 56. Quickly. 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 56. 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 56 says, the sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. Paul has made it plain. This is plain. This is clear. There is no sort of confusion. The definition of death is sin. The definition of sin is the philosophy of the religious law. Sin and death equal the philosophy of the religious law. Whosoever would abide by, or would have their faith influenced by, or would live their faith through the philosophy of the religious law, to the mind of the Bible, is dead, and being dead is a sinner. Dead in what? We reviewed last time. Of course, dead in sins and trespasses, but dead in routine, dead in practice, dead in thought, dead in feeling, dead in approach, because that's what this is about. This is about approach. If a man keep my saying, he shall not taste death. Part of the saying of this individual is that there is redemption from the philosophy of the religious law. He that keeps my saying, she that keeps my saying will not taste the philosophy of the religious law. There is to be a rising up from the death that the philosophy of the religious law causes. And this death, if it may not be so evident, this death, for example, relying on the pen of priest and minister, ancient and past, to dictate our thoughts and our feelings about what the Bible is saying and about our experience, takes away from us being able to have a knowledge of what we are actually experiencing for it to be beneficial in a living and in a real way, for us to continue to keep doing it and to have nothing to remind us or to rely on. We are to have a faith that breathes as sure as our lungs. As there is no thing constricting our lungs to breathe, that we don't even have to, who thinks to breathe, right? But the moment that you do begin to think about breathing, that's the moment that you then start to think, oh, I'm breathing. And then you start to flip out because you're thinking about it. But our faith is supposed to go through an experience where it's taking breaths, but we're not noticing. A reliance on the philosophy of the religious law means a reliance on religious theory or a reliance on theological theory that is breathing for us. We're on life support. The longer we continue to take in and digest the things that we're taking from outside sources, we're on life support. Our faith is on life support. We need these things to stimulate our belief, making our belief not genuine, as opposed to us taking a stand and patiently and temperately, despite what we think, despite what we think we know, despite what we may feel, despite the consequences of putting into practice, these words within the Bible, to experience them, to gain a knowledge of them, so that our faith may breathe by the knowledge that it gains, and we will see this played out. So everyone that I do talk to, it sounds harsh, right? And even when Stephen was preaching, they called an assembly against him and said, this man is trying to cut off from us the routine of Moses and is trying to change the entire religion in practice. But the man said no. There is a way that is now growing. There is a growth and a development pattern and process that the Bible is concerned with. And the way that we're going about it and have been since the beginning of time, it is not doing anything for our human being. It's not doing anything for our mind. It is not doing anything for our devotional conversations conscience. It is keeping us plateaued. We are not growing in faith and in strength and in love and in devotion with the living God. And it's doing something against how that is allowing us to not be with one another in that way also. And so the present definition of sin, according to the doctrine that is given to us by the Bible, by the first apostles, observing that crucified body not as a literal body of a literal man crucified, but as a religious philosophy that is crucified. What is crucified is denoted as sin, is categorized as death. To see that body crucified is to have sin and death magnified to us, to know what it is so that we can stay from it. We reviewed this verse last time, but again, we will review it in the book of Romans chapter 7, verses 5 and 6. Romans chapter 7, verses 5 and 6. Romans chapter 7, verses 5 and 6. Romans 7, verses 5 and 6. Reads, "For when we were in the flesh, the motions of sins, which were by the law, did work in our members to bring forth fruit unto death. But now we are delivered from the law, that being dead wherein we were held, that we should serve in newness of spirit and not in oldness of the letter. If any man keep my saying, he shall not taste death." The strength of sin, 1 Corinthians 15:56. The strength of sin, the string of death is sin. Sorry, it's the morning. I'm gonna make it. 1 Corinthians 15:56. The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. That's where my mind was at. The strength of sin is the law. Now, don't just, put that phrase, the law, as in Moses. Don't just put that as Moses. Because in this modern day, there is a religious law, and there are, within our religious denominations, church manuals. Now, these manuals are, in a sense, a religious law. And by these church manuals, belief is dictated. And so what the Bible is saying is that where there is a religious law, the Bible's not specific. It doesn't say Moses at all. The Bible has left it open in the sense of everything that falls under the banner of Moses is what is considered to be a religious law. So where you have a mind or a conscience dictating what to do, eat, wear, think, act, give, confess, so on and so forth, believe, theorize, strategize, where you have all of this going on, this is considered to be a religious law. And to this day, we have these in our churches. And to this day, it is within the Bible that we all have and we all can open, where it is absolutely not the thing to do anymore. Because according to the Bible, and according to what the first apostles taught, the figurative illustration drawn by the crucifixion is that the physical man's body represented the quote-unquote law. Where we see this body crucified, we should be seeing everything categorized under Moses and following thereafter as crucified, and this crucifixion enduring from that point on until the end of time. What this means is that there should be no reliance on the pen of priest and minister for our experience. And this is blasphemous, isn't it? Absolutely blasphemous. Because how can there be a religion without the priest and minister? How can we not trust our practice without some sort of pen of inspiration? How? Do we dare do what Peter says and let the living God be treated as a creator? Yes. Yes. Peter's right. We have to let the living God work as a creator. And in order for that to happen, we have to be a free canvas. We have to be a blank canvas. We have to be a free ground. We have to let go of what we're holding on to that defines our confidence. We have to let that go, and we have to trust that the faith we have will make it up to the living God's ears and mind to give to us an experience to where he will actually fulfill his new covenant promise within us and write his name in us. And so if a man keep my saying, he shall not taste death. If this saying is pointing to the fact that there will be a newness of thought, a newness of feeling, that there will be no desire to entertain what is considered death, that there will be no desire to even fall into that, to die, not literally, but mentally and inwardly, that there will be no more need to rely on the things that we need to rely on for a stimulus. If this saying is that powerful, then that means that this saying is the opposite of what the saying or the philosophy behind the religious law is. Now, the religious law, the saying of the religious law is that if you do, you must live. And if you do and live by, then to the divine eye, you are righteous, pious, holy, and accepted. Now, the crucifixion of this man's body, figuratively illustrating that this philosophy of the religious law is crucified, Paul and the rest of the apostles are letting us know that it is wrong to continue to believe that the more that we do and the more that we live by what we do as attributed to the divine eye via sacrifice or via belief on theory or ritual or baptism or holy or holiday or tradition or this, that, and the other, the more that we continue to do this, the more that we are continually seen as unjust. Because the crucifixion of that body means the crucifixion of this practice. Now, the crucifixion of this practice means the rising up of a better practice. And that better practice, we've seen this verse before, but the book of Isaiah, chapter 53 and verse 11. So the book of Isaiah, chapter 53 and verse 11. The book of Isaiah, chapter 53 and verse 11. He shall see of the travail of his soul and shall be satisfied. Now, part B is really what I want us to focus on. Part B, or the next part, I should say, the next part. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many. When we're hearing, if a man keep my saying, he shall not taste death, we're hearing, if a man keep my knowledge, he will be justified. Whoso keeps my saying will not know or taste death. Whoso knows and keeps my knowledge will be justified. And the key to justification is a knowing, or as the Bible says, by his knowledge. Now, this individual's knowledge is this individual's saying. The fact that it comes down to knowledge and the fact that we have to keep a saying, this is letting us know that there is more involved. We are to be more involved, and not necessarily we physically, we mentally. A saying is reduced to words. Knowledge is reduced to words and experience. Justification being reduced to words and to experience means that justification relates to what is within and to the mind. Being redeemed from the law, as it says in the book of Galatians, being redeemed from the law means being separated from the philosophy of the religious law. Being separated from the philosophy of the religious law, we are to be brought to the philosophy of the living God's chief apostle, or his saying, or his knowledge. So we are redeemed from this one practice of constraining our faith by the conscience of priests and ministers, past and present, so that we may enjoy the liberty of what this man's saying is, that we may enjoy the liberty of an experience of this individual's knowledge. We are to grow close to this individual's saying so that we, the body of our faith, may revive. And so in summary, it is the saying of the living God's chief apostle that is to stop death. Again, the saying of the living God's chief apostle is to stop death. Remember that the definition of death is the philosophy of the religious law. With death being the philosophy of the religious law, this means that this individual saying, the saying of the living God's chief apostle, is opposite of the philosophy of the religious law. And so the actual opposite of that practice, as not being tied down by routine, as not being tied down by mental and physical tradition, as not being tied down by theory that we have not had any personal encounter with, the opposite of that is taking in a knowing or a knowledge of the living God's devotional character and exercising it. Proof. Book of Job. The book of Job, chapter 21 and 22. The book of Job, chapter 21 and 22. Job chapter 22, Job chapter 22, verses 21 and 22. Job 22, verses 21 and 22 reads, "Acquaint now thyself with him and be at peace. Thereby good shall come unto thee. Receive, I pray thee, the law from his mouth, and lay up his words in thine heart." Now, the law that we are to receive, it is from the mouth of the living God. We may believe that the law came from the living God's mouth to Moses, but at this point in time, this verse has no intercessor between us and the living God's law. It is just that law and us, and that law is coming from his mouth. That law is coming from his mouth. And this is the fulfillment of that new covenant promise. I will write my law in their hearts and in their minds, and they will know me. That's in there. That's actually in the new covenant promise. They will know me. Justification is synonymous with knowing the living God. To be justified is to have your knowing or your knowledge of the living God clean and cleared and progressing upwards.